Right. Hello. Good morning. Let's try this again. Oh no. No, no. Oh, it's a big window again. How am I gonna fix this? I figured out why. Like the problem is when I refocus or when I focus on my content, I can't see anything because there's this like tiny window that's gonna it's supposed to be like this tiny window. Uh but because of like Mac is auto resizing when you drag into the corners of the screen, it's suddenly resized and you can't resize it again. And I'm not sure how to fix this. Yeah, I thought it would reset when I restarted the app, but it doesn't. Um uh okay. You know what? I'm gonna start a new stream, but I just have to stream to try to fix this. Shortcut to change size of an act. Oh, this is really bad. Like it does resize if I like do it on Mac. Stage manager. Yeah, if I do, what's the? Can I see it here? No. I wonder if I have to completely remove Ecamm and then install it again. Oh, hold Option. Oh, finally. I fixed it. Okay. Oh my god, I had to hold Option to fix it. That was a rough one. Okay, great, we're back. So I feel better today. I don't think I am 100% back. Like, I slept great, but then I'm sitting on the couch this morning, and our oldest daughter and my partner are like talking about something, and then they ask me. And I felt like super calm, and I've been working on, I'm gonna show it to you. I've been working on divergent to dos. And as I'm about to respond to them, our youngest just interrupts and like daddy 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 daddy, and I'm trying to tell him like just 2 seconds, and like at 4 years old they don't quite understand this unless you're like exceptionally firm, and they might feel ashamed for interrupting and stuff, but they don't have any what's it called, they don't have any impulse control, right? Mm. My point being that my adrenaline just fires through the roof. um and it's such a good test of how you actually feel. Like you can wake up feeling super rested, and then there's like one tiny annoying thing, and the impact that tiny annoying thing has actually tells you how you feel that day. So yeah, I'm definitely not back in 100% back, but we are gonna work on the suspense stuff. So I'm super excited about that. So we're gonna read the suspense plan. But before that, I just want to show. I've been working on divergent to dos, and I got this amazing feedback from a colleague. So I was just in a meeting, and my colleague just showed like was tabbing through her apps, and then like divergent to dos popped up, and she was like, I just like you really nailed it. And then she had some ideas, and it made me think about like commits on GitHub, like creating this tapestry of activity, right? So I added this thing called activity, and what's really cool about this is that every weekend I'm actually sending in a batch to OpenAI with all the users completed to dos from the previous week, right? So it's much cheaper because it's a batch request to OpenAI. And then it builds up this like report of the previous week. So I can see like this tapestry of attention, like how much did I do each day the whole year, which is really cool. I can click them and I can see like the specific to-dos I did that day. But if I hit tab here, I actually get an AI summary of what I did that week. So she mentioned this is like really nice for like a yearly review to kind of get a oversight of what you did. I'm still working on the actual prompt for these things to make sense of it. But this is from the perspective of what you actually did in your, so it writes it as if you wrote it, right? So it creates a summary for you. And then it has like a lot of details. It knows, of course, how many to-dos you completed, but it also knows like when you completed them, how much time it took from you created it to you completed it, how many times you moved the to-do. Like it has a lot of information that I hope to be able to use to kind of give you more of a underlying description of that week. Like, was this an intense week? Like, I want it to be more about how you did that week personally, emotionally, as opposed to what you actually did, right? And I think those details can actually help write that. But currently it's quite focused on the actual contents of the to-dos, so I want to play more with that. Yeah, and then when you focus the app on a Monday, what happens is that, let's see if I can, yeah, so I have this magic shortcut. So when you focus the app on a Monday, you get this dialogue and it shows you how many to-dos you completed the previous week. It shows you the activity through those days. And then it gives a personal, like, this is also AI based, but it's based on your what you actually did, right? So it gives you this like bump of like great job kind of thing, right? So this is again like quite generic. I'm not quite sure how to do this, but I have the data. It's just about like what message I want to convey. So I'm super excited about this. And then, good morning, Adam. Did you see my demo of activity? You have to watch it. It's pretty cool. But then I also added tags. So I don't want this to be a system that you add a lot of structure to. Like it's not going to be a tool. It's just going to be like you just dump things, right? So, but you want to have the ability to highlight certain things. So I can do tags now. So I can say docs. Yeah, I just demoed the activity thing. Yeah, it came through really, really great. I'm super pumped about it. But yeah, so now I can like highlight. I can do things like that, like this. Work on the SDK docs, for example. Oh no, I thought I fixed that. Ah, dag nugget. Okay, I have to fix that bug. Oh, that's interesting. Oh, I think it was because docs. Yeah, now it works. Was it because I hit tab first? No, that's weird. Yeah. Yeah, this is interesting. Like, why didn't it work the first time? But anyways, work on, so the point is that you can have these highlights and you can use them for whatever you want. Maybe you want to do a customer, you want to do a type of task like work on SDK bug. No, now it happened again. Okay, I'm able to reproduce it at least. And the point is that you don't choose the colors or anything like that, because that's like, then it becomes this like management tool. It has colors based on hash. So you don't choose the color, but it has consistent coloring, right? So a bug will always be blue, for example. Docs will always be green. And then the really cool thing is that if you have like a customer name, and I go in here and I start writing D, for example, you see that it shadows them, right? So so I can hit tab now and it fills out the pill, which is really, or the tag, which is really, really cool. Anyways, so I'm really happy about this. Let's see. Okay. Search on them or filter them. Currently you can't. I have this core value of not making it a management tool. Like, you shouldn't have to manage this tool. Like, the only thing you need it for, like, it shouldn't be a management tool. And I'm doing everything I can to not make it feel like I was even hesitant about putting like activity as a button up here, because it starts cluttering the UI. But then I started thinking, like, wouldn't it be really cool if you could like use AI to ask things about the year, right? So in the article, I'm saying there's going to be no AI agents, and now I'm like seeing, oh, we have all this information that you put in over the year about what you were doing. We have all this information that's under the hood with every to-do. When was it created? When did you actually finish it? How many times did you move it? How many to-dos did you have each week? Like, we have deeper information about the stress levels and everything. And it would be so cool if you could like use an AI to like you could create summaries, you could do whatever you wanted, and just ask about all this data. Yeah, so yeah, but that's what I mean. It's like the thing is, how am I gonna do this? So when it becomes like a to-do list is when you have, okay, you need lists, you need flags, you need references, you need to be able to filter, you need to be able to filter on completed and non-completed. Like, you have all this functionality, and I'm not saying that like that is bad functionality. It's just adding that changes what the app is. Like, from a value perspective. So I totally get like the feature. It's just that I promised myself that I'm going to be really, really critical about every feature, that it doesn't like make it a management tool. But yeah, and if you wanted to work on bugs, like they would be highlighted. So it's not like and you shouldn't have like 100 to-dos, right? The point is that this is going to be to the edge of what your attention can manage. So as you can see, I do a lot of stuff every day, but it's like, or I have a lot of things I need to do, but my attention is limited. So this reflects what my attention can actually manage, not the corpus of what I'm supposed to do, right? Because that becomes overwhelming. So if you start like just shoving stuff in here to organize everything that you need to do, I'm having a hard time explaining this, but yeah, I'm just stating I approach this with a lot of skepticism, every single thing I add. But yeah, I have a feeling one thing is gonna, yeah, but I would love for you to try it, Adam. And of course, like the whole activity thing was based on feedback. So and maybe as I just shipped this, so I haven't started using the tags myself. Maybe I'll notice this, right? But yeah, but I'm really like, it was so cool in that meeting when my colleague just had it on her screen. It's the first time I felt like I've been working in startups many times, but I've never felt like someone used something I built, like that randomly up close in the wild kind of thing. It's always been in support situations, or it's been working with a lot of other people. It's like not my product or my product idea, but it was like the first time, and it felt fucking great. So yeah, I'm so pumped about getting to this place. So yeah, anyways, let's go and do something fun. Suspense. So let's see what Claude has been. Thanks, Adam. So one thing I just want to mention first that I didn't know about Suspense is that Suspense actually has two completely different APIs. You have the well-known Suspense component, which catches async values or whatever, however you want to put it. But it also has something called transition. And I have thoughts on it. The point is that if you do this with, didn't I ask ChatGPT about this? Look at me, children's self-reliance research. What did it actually say? Oh, I asked it here. Okay. um, yeah. Okay, here we have it. Yeah, I feel like in our generation, like children are not as self-reliant. And it just adds to the stress of being a parent in this generation, because we would just let them out and they would have to deal with things on their own, for better and for worse, I guess. But yeah, anyways. So the point is, you have Suspense here. And then you have this thing called create transition. And maybe this is common knowledge to people, but it wasn't common knowledge to me. So when this page loads, the Suspense will take the user page and the feed page and rather show main skeleton and feed skeleton, right? That's the basic. But then the Suspense has resolved, right? So it has resolved the page and it is in a resolved state. If you were to go in and refetch the user or refetch the feed, it would throw back to the Suspense and it would show the main skeleton and feed skeleton again. So what a transition does is that it ensures that it basically doesn't do that. It keeps the current, it tells the Suspense that just keep the current UI or make it lazy, right? Don't act on the new async value until it's resolved, and then you go and re-render. Which is very interesting. But the way it works is very decoupled. It feels kind of like use effect to me. I think it's very hard to reason about, like when reading the code, because the code, there's no like, so the reason I mentioned use effect is that if you have an incrementer and you want to do something simple as just logging the result of that increment, if you do that imperatively, so for example, yeah, let me just write some pseudo code here. So if I go in and I say h1 count, whatever, and then on click, I do increment, or let's just call it new count. It's count plus 1. And then I say set count, new count, and then I console log new count, right? You can read line by line what happens when you click this thing. This is all that happens. But I could have chosen to do something like this instead. count and then console log count, right? Now these are very close together as we read it here, but the point is that this is indirection. By reading onClick, you don't know that you're logging out this, right? And that is just worse code. It's objectively worse code in the from the perspective of understanding how the code works. Like you're lacking context, you're lacking understanding of what side effect is there to actually clicking this element, and so on. And then I feel this is a little bit the same, because when you do start profile and you set the user ID, there's nothing that tells you what happens next, right? But what actually happens next is it okay, I'm gonna try to explain it. So what first, what happens when you call set user ID? When you call set user ID, the user page is going to reload the or start the fetch again. Like we're missing some code there. So there is a function inside user page that is observing the user ID. And when you change the user ID, that, like, let's call it a resource in the world of Solid, that resource is going to run again and trigger the suspense. And that happens synchronously. That's the point. It's like you changed it, this synchronously, it like triggers the signal for the resource, and the resource refetches, and it throws to suspense again. But since we have start profile, so a transition isn't like bound to a specific suspense component or suspense boundary. It's global. So we're just saying, hey, the app, there's a transition going on. Any resource that is affected directly by changing this state or changing this signal is not going to throw to suspense. That's basically what it means. So when I do go user and it runs this, it won't like trigger a suspense again. But I can still look at this happening. Let's see, where is it? Pending profile. But I do get a state of the underlying resource. So it does throw to suspense, but suspense doesn't change out the UI, but it still has the state of the suspense, like it's working on something that you can look at here. It's incredibly complex to reason about. But it came from React, right? So you can't like, and so this is the thing I think Solid has an issue with, is that it's so much inspired by React, but React made some decisions based on reconciliation. So this might be the only way to deal with this, with reconciliation, but it might not be the way to deal with it in an observation world. And me having such a hard time explaining this mechanism, and it fundamentally being so indirected, I feel like there should be a better way to do this. What I do like though is, like, I like the concept of a suspense boundary. It makes a lot of sense that you can just consume async values, and then the suspense boundary is going to manage the UI, like the loading states. But then yeah, what do you do with the following values? Like, what would be a good API for that? So maybe we should start like I haven't actually reflected on this. So but there is like so you can have like something like TanStack, like where you have like use query or whatever, And that's nice. And the nice thing about that is that you can throw to suspense, but then you'll never change the promise, right? You're just going to keep that promise, and then in the background, you're going to update that promise value. So there's no more throwing to suspense. Now it just becomes something you manage. Oh, sorry, there was some latency in my brain. Look at what? How we would use it. Oh, you mean the suspense with transition? Yeah. Yeah, I don't know if I have Oh, you mean in the UI Lib? Yeah, I would love to. Yeah, so what I was intent. So the plan I was planning to go through is actually this API for the UI Lib. But now when I started ranting about this API, I was thinking maybe we should rather try to discuss how could it be solved differently. That makes more sense as an API. And then evaluate, maybe we don't even want to implement this transitions thing because it's so hard to reason about. Okay, cool. Let's try to do that. So the only place I can come up with to start with is like, let's actually take this. Yeah, let's discuss different options. So let's do. Okay, so function my comp. For okay, yeah, so this gives us something. So one thing you could do instead, wait, this is a bad example. Let's create a proper example. Sorry. So we have some UI here, and then we have suspense, and then we have some nested component, and then we have, sorry about the, oh, can I like import? No, that kind of sucks. Anyways, we'll manage. Nested component. And then we would have, oh, sorry. Something like this. And then there will be something fetching. So let's imagine using this async thing. Create async. Fetch something. Yeah, let's just do this. Yeah, sorry. So, but fetch something. Sorry, let's do this. Props ID. You have to excuse all the thingies here. ID, set ID, create signal. It's just 0, and then we're going to pass ID like this. I guess this is solid. Okay. So the point here is that, oh, and then something async. So this is like the new stuff from Solid, where you kind of have this create async thing. The point is that every time this ID changes, it's going to throw to this suspense boundary. So if we want to actually change user, is it a user? Change ID, something like that. What we would have to do is like do this is pending start what was it? ID transition start ID trans something like that, create transition. So what we would have to do here when we change the ID is we do this and then we set ID, new ID, set ID, new ID. Yes, exactly. So this is a bit simpler to explain. So we have a parent component with a suspense boundary. It sets up a nested component where it passes the ID. That nested component fetches something asynchronously that we use in the UI. The first time we do this with initial ID, it's going to throw to suspense. But when we go in and we change the ID, we start a transition. And when set ID is called, it's going to go down here and fetch something again. But since we did this with a transition, the suspense boundary knows this because it happens as we, so if I set ID async here, it wouldn't work, right? It's because it happens in the synchronously in the transition scope. Set ID triggers fetch something, it throws to suspense, but suspense knows now that that we're in a transition scope. And I'm actually not quite sure how it works. Does it work because it synchronously triggers this scope and it runs and it throws to suspense? Is that why it works? Or does it actually track some signal stuff? I don't know. That there's some async stuff happening here. But let's imagine that synchronously this set ID leads to fetch something, leads to throw to suspense. And that's how suspense knows that we're in a transition context. So it won't hide the UI. It would rather allow that async thing to happen in the background. And when it resolves, I guess nothing really happens. Because what really happens is that this async updates and then the UI updates. The point being that it happens in the background. And then you have this is pending that you can use to show the lazy loading, basically, from this create async. Yeah, new data would just be updated inline, exactly. So a transition is basically prevent suspense from hiding, going to its fallback. Prevent it from going to its fallback, but still track the resolvement so that this pending state can be used to understand when it's done, right? So the coupling here is that it doesn't care about what async happened, right? Which is a good thing. That's the power of suspense, is that it doesn't care what async happened. It's just something async happened. Yeah, after first time only. Yeah. So the initial thing would be suspense, and then after that, given that you use the transition, like that's how you choose the behavior of suspense, is using a transition or not. Okay, so the good thing about suspense is that it decouples what async happened from what to do when something async happens. But the tricky part is that you have this transition that's bound to something, so you can't like see here, I guess. Yeah. Or to put it the other way, when I do start ID transition here, it's hard for me to, like, I have to know about this and I have to know about this to understand the behavior. So it feels... Yeah. So the thing is, what I would expect, I guess... Okay, so just to start hammering at it. So what you could say is that I actually want... I don't want to decouple the transition, because the transition is bound to this specific thing. That's what I'm doing here. Because I'm listening to the ID, I'm setting the ID up here, and so it's bound to this specific fetch. Yeah, it implicitly recouples, right? And that's the hard thing. That's the hard thing to identify. Like, where is the coupling? Just like an event, right? It's almost like this set ID just emits an event, and you have no idea what's listening to this. And this is true, right? But yeah, this is so interesting, because this is what like all reactivity systems are, right? But it's funny, like when you do state management, you don't care. You don't care what is using. So what if this was like, okay, let's do this instead to kind of help reason about it. So if I did this, suddenly we don't care, right? I'm setting the ID, but I don't care what uses that ID, right? It doesn't matter, because it's just updating the UI somewhere related to that ID. But now we're not just updating the UI, keeping it in sync. We are creating a side effect. And the question is, why do I suddenly care about that? Well, I think the reason I care about it is because I don't know if set ID is going to cause something async to trigger or not. That's why I don't care, or that's why I care. That's my problem with this, is how do I know that set ID from this perspective needs to have a transition? Like, I don't know it's being used by something async. Here it could be anything, right? So it's almost like, why isn't just implicitly all state changes a transition? Or to put it in other words, why doesn't it default to being a transition? And then you would rather opt out of that if you actually wanted the suspense boundary to re-trigger. So, like, to explore that, what if you just did this, right? You just set the ID, and then you have this async thing using it, but by default, it won't throw to suspense again. Yeah, but that could be like, it depends on the app and the scenario. So I don't think it's interesting. Yeah, exactly. It's just kind of flipping it around. So instead of like putting transitions on top of the current behavior, transitions are the current behavior. Like a transition is, you have to have a value there. Like the suspense boundary needs to already have... Oh, but what you could do instead is... Oh, this is interesting. So what if we think about it from this perspective? Create async is stateful, right? It knows that it has resolved a value. So what if you just said, like I'm just putting something in here. Transition false. Like by default, it's transition true, right? Or it's suspend. I think that's also transition, suspend. It's like two terms. What if you said suspend false? So what you're doing now is that you're saying that you're kind of putting the logic back into the async thing. So you're saying the create async fetches, and you always want, if you're using suspense, you always wanted to throw to suspense the first time. Like this, that's the whole point of suspense, is to show a loading state. But then you can choose in the source of the async value if you want to throw or trigger suspense again on the next set of values or not. Right? Because that's the thing that decides how suspense should act. It's the source of the data, where you actually use it. That's where you decide how should the UI experience be like. So I think that makes a lot more sense. That you configure it in the async source, not as a decoupled concept. Yeah, exactly. So you could have like two async sources where you say that, yeah, you have two async sources. One of them, you say this, if this changes, it should always trigger the suspense fallback, right? But the other thing might not be that important. It can lazily update. So you say that this should not throw to the suspense boundary when it updates. So when you load up that experience initially, regardless of which one of them, like when you fire up the experience initially, both of those async values needs to be there to display the initial UI, which makes sense. But then if you change one async value nested, you say that, no, this can lazily evaluate, don't trigger suspense. But if this other value changes, I want to trigger suspense. That makes much more sense to me, because it's the async value and what it represents conceptually that decides the UI experience. Yeah, exactly. So okay, so let's say that, oh, even if it's just yeah, and why doesn't React do this? Why doesn't React allow you to, why does it have transition? Why doesn't it allow you to, like it could, yeah. I'm just trying to think, like, why did React initially choose this API? Yeah, I don't know. There's probably some reason for it. Maybe they wanted transition to represent more than async values. Like more than, yeah, I think transition is used. Okay, let's ask. What is transition used for in React? Is it only used for like suspense and promises? I'm trying to reflect on why have this decoupled transition API? Why not be able to, at the point where you do the async thing, you decide the suspense behavior for that async thing? Why have this decoupled transition API? There must be a reason. Yeah. Yeah, because there's a thing about React is like, for example, the user is going to be used for multiple things, like the context for a promise, and maybe transition is similar. Like they want to use it for multiple things. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. And this is interesting. So transition in React is not for suspense and promises. It's a way to generally tell React what are important state updates and what are non-important state updates. So in React, you wouldn't have, that's interesting. So in React, if you change a state, that wouldn't immediately like trigger a refetch, right? There is no concept um, of doing that. It would be like a use effect or something that would consume that state, and that use effect would maybe trigger a refetch. So, but a state transition might not be related to that, right? It might be related to anything. So it basically just lets you prioritize how important is this state update I'm making now. So that makes a lot of sense. So, but in Solid, I don't know if they have like, and the reason is because of the high cost of applying those state changes, right? But when you have a properly like reactive system or observable system like Solid and this lib, the whole point is that you don't do that bulk of work for every state change. You do the absolute minimum work needed. So you can imagine the classic example here is when you type something, like you're searching something, and you want to deprioritize updating the list, right? So you don't get jank as you're typing. Yeah, I guess that could still be an issue with Solid and observable systems, because in that specific use case, you're probably, or maybe not, like when you're doing the search, how often do you actually change out the complete elements in the list? Yeah, it's interesting. Hello there. Well, it's not like batch. So batch is like synchronously make all these state changes, then emit to the observers that something happened. So you don't have like make a state change, emit, synchronously make a state change, emit, synchronously make a state change, emit. So this is really important for React because of the amount of work it needs to do for every state change. But still, like you might do multiple state changes here as well. So that's what batch does. But a transition just says, okay, make all these state changes, but then deprioritize it. Don't immediately act on it at the end of this function scope, which is the transition. Act on it at a later point in time when there's nothing else to do. So, yeah. Okay, but then let's ask, okay, this makes a lot of sense, but Solid adopted suspense and transition, but it seems like in Solid, a transition is very much bound to suspense and async values. Is this true, or does Solid also have like this transition being a prioritization of when to emit state changes? Yeah, because if we're gonna make this about the async values, it makes a lot of sense what we've been discussing. Okay, great question. I'm such a sucker for ChatGPT. It makes me feel good. Yeah, it is a great question. In Solid, transitions are mostly about suspense. They're not general lower the priority of arbitrary state updates. And doesn't have a cooperative scheduler to reprioritize CPU work. Exactly. Track keeping previously exposed suspense. Yeah. Create. Oh yeah, they have create defer. Makes a derived signal that lags behind source during rapid changes. Yeah, so create deferred is more like a debounce. Yeah, this is debounce. This is not about transitions. Thank you, Adam. Okay, but I think we have our answer. And if this reasoning is like correct, it says something about Solid adopting APIs from React that doesn't quite make sense for Solid. Like they are fundamentally different problems they're trying to solve with the same API, which at least if Solid is going to implement, and again, disclaimer, I don't know what the reasoning is behind these API decisions, but if Solid is going to adapt transition to manage async, like how async resolvement behaves with Suspense, I think it's a bad or not ideal design decision because it's so decoupled and hard to reason about. I would rather have create async, like whatever async that's going to consume a suspense boundary, that's where you decide how it communicates with that suspense boundary, how it behaves related to that suspense boundary. Okay. We've learned something today. Maybe it's wrong, but we learned something. So the point is now, what does this mean for this UI Lib we're building? We don't have create async. We basically just have... No, no, exactly. We don't have that. So the way we would do this, we would just say async, and again, we would have something like this because we support because we're explicit about the observation scopes. So it would look something like this in the UI Lib. So it wouldn't be like a primitive for it. But this is a problem, right? Because now we can't, there's nowhere to like configure the behavior. Though what you could do is instead of create, yeah, this is why I have had this experience a couple of times where, oh, if you could only use JavaScript, and then you get so far and then it's like, oh, but we need this option, for example. We can't just use JavaScript. We need a new abstraction. We need a new primitive. Or you can start getting really clever, right? Oh, if it has like some kind of name or something, and then it will work itself out. Yeah, that's true. Like you could do... Yeah, it's interesting. Like... Yeah, let's just play with that. So it doesn't matter what you do. You could do... you could put it here, like creates its bend. Like, but it would look exactly the same, which is fine. It's just that, is it needed or is it not needed? You could even call it create async. Doesn't matter. But the point is that you would configure its behavior. You could also do, we're just playing here now, so just to get our heads outside the box, you could also do something like async create, something like that. So you kind of put it on the return value instead. So whenever a reactive child, which this is a reactive child, if this consumes this async value, it knows that it is an async value. You could even say that, you could even say like suspend or something, suspend create, and it knows it is a suspension, if that, if that's the term. And then you could like configure it, how it should behave. But I don't like that either. Like it should be specifically to, because you could use this async function for different things, not necessarily a reactive child. So it should be like on the actual reactive child. But it is interesting how like going back to what should the default be? Yeah, I also like suspend async. Like we talked about the default, like should the default be that whenever the fetch something runs again, should it throw to suspense and trigger the fallback? Or should it just do that, of course, the first time, or you won't have anything to display? But this is already cached, like it's already memoized, this value. So when it resolves again, maybe we should default to inlining the update. But then there is this other thing that's really important, is the pending state. You want to know whenever this runs again that it's pending, even though it happens lazily, so that you can indicate in the UI that, okay, something's happening here. So that makes me think like you would do like create suspense or whatever. And then you would have like suspense is pending. And the reason we don't do the array thing, which is also a React thing, the reason React does this is because it can't have objects. Because those, you mutate objects, like they're functional, they want to make everything immutable. So this is a way to like make things immutable. So if I had like so you could say that like state was like state dot value state dot change or whatever, but it would encourage you or have some level of accessibility to just changing the value directly, right? That's what React wants to avoid, which is why they have this array thing. I remember when they showed it the first time, it's like, what the hell? And we've gotten so used to it. But for a mutable experience like UI Lib, but for a mutable experience like Solid and this library, it makes more sense, in my opinion, that you use objects, because here you want the is pending to be like observable, so you have to do it like this. But then you would kind of do suspense dot value or whatever. Well, I guess you would do the same. You could even call it suspense.promise or whatever. And then the point is that, yeah, exactly. So you have suspense, and then what's going to happen here is that, and you can argue about like what the default behavior should be. But the nice thing about this is that this actually looks like the state API. Yeah, create state, and then you have like count 0. So if you wanted to make count 0 reactive, you would do this. And now if you want to make that reactive, you do suspense.promise. But you can still consume suspense.promise wherever you want, right? So you can still do like await suspense.promise in some imperative click handler or whatever, if you wanted to do that, which I also like. And then, as you said, Adam, you can optionally like style like opacity suspense that is pending like 0.5 or 1 or whatever. Yeah, I really like the consistency as well. What I'm starting to think about now is yeah, but the thing now is that this is like create query. This is the create query API. This is create query, and it has query, it has error, it has refetch, it has fetch. Refetch happens in the background, and it's like is refetching. So you have is fetching. So this is the API we created for ReactX. So is fetching means it's fetching from scratch, and then you have query.error. You have yeah. So these are like functions. So you can refetch, which happens in the background. You can fetch, which triggers suspense, and then you have is refetching, and of course query.data. So then you would do query.data. Yeah, what would you use here? Oh, sorry. You would still use, yeah, you would still do query.promise. So, but this is a much bigger, is refetching. So, but this is like an even, it gives even more flexibility. So you, if you wanted to treat it as, how should I put this? How should I put this? It basically allows you to do exactly what you want to do. Yeah, sorry. So this would be, yeah, so you can maybe do something like this. Query.suspend or something. I don't know. Well, it basically just returns the promise. Yeah, I don't know. Query.promise. So the point is that, okay, just to summarize this. So in this case, oh, fuck, I have a... I had a coffee chat with a colleague, but I'm energized. Okay, to summarize this, it's like it gives you all the power you need from something async. So it basically you can treat it as pure suspense. So if we remove this, you kind of see what it's about now. So if you wanted to treat this as like a pure suspense thing, you would do you would just do this. And yeah, I guess the difference now between this one and the query we originally designed is that this can actually be triggered by a change to this ID. So that's what you would have to configure. What's going to happen when this ID changes? But this is the thing that makes me a little bit hesitant in the first place, to have a reactive fetch function. It's, yeah. But it does make sense. Like, it shouldn't matter what the state is, if it's asynchronous or not. Like, it's like having so here you would have like double, right? State.count. So it's the same thing. Like, you're changing the count. You just want this double value to be derived from that. So that's fine. And again, if you change the ID, you're basically deriving a value here. But since it's async, it's a little bit more complicated. So I think that's the thing. Like, the primitive that Solid creates with create async is the ability to derive an asynchronous value. It's a beautiful concept, like profile, fetch profile ID, right? You're just deriving the profile asynchronously. It's a beautiful idea, but at the same time, there's so much complexity to that, because you're not just deriving it. You have to manage the error state. How should the refetch work? What should happen if it's triggered twice? Like, if it's already fetching the profile and the ID changes again, you have to ignore the previous one. Of course, yeah, but that makes sense. Yeah, I really like this idea, and that's where create query falls apart. It's not just deriving an async value from some state, but it does give you this imperative, and Solid also has this in create async. You could say profile refetch or something, refresh or whatever. So it does have that. But yeah. But I do, let's drop this one. Profile.promise. Yeah, you don't need data here. Is pending. Yeah, what would you call it? Is resolving? Like, fetching is very like query. Yeah, exactly. Like, it's very close. Yeah. It really, the good thing about that query tool is that it covers everything you need from managing an async value, both from the perspective of consuming it in the UI, using it with Suspense, because you don't necessarily want to use Suspense, right? And that's also the thing, is like, create async wants you to use Suspense, but you don't necessarily want to use Suspense. You might just want to use the inline states to rather like dynamically show it or not. So yeah, so that's why we actually have data here, because this is using Suspense, But you might prefer in this context to manually. That's also this decision to make. It's like, no, should it all be suspense based, or would you want to allow it to like basically do this? I'm gonna just inline it here. So if profile dot is fetching, is fetching, return, loading, if profile error, return error, or return profile.data. Right? This is also a perfectly valid way to use it. Yeah, exactly. And I think it should support both. Because even as powerful as Suspense is, having the ability to do this, I think makes a lot of sense. So that's what I mean. Is like you can choose to use the promise. You can choose to do this inline state machine thing. You have imperative ways to refetch or do a complete fetch, like refetch being lazy, fetch being, yeah, this is really bound to Suspense. So, oh, this is interesting. What you could do, instead of having refetch, this is interesting. You rather configure on create async if you want it to be lazy or not. So what that means is that we keep this being reactive, right? So if the ID changes, it's gonna refetch. But if it's lazy and you're using Suspense, that's gonna happen in the background. It's not gonna trigger Suspense again. But if you have lazy, and this is also true for calling fetch, right? So this option is for what should happen when we rerun the fetch. What's gonna happen? It being implicit because it has observed a change to a state it relies on, or if you're explicitly calling fetch. So if it's lazy true and you're using the promise with Suspense, it's going to throw to Suspense, going to show the Suspense fallback. But if it runs again, it won't do that. But if you do false and you're using the promise, it will always throw to Suspense. This makes a lot of sense to me. And then, yeah, and then you don't need refetching. You just need is fetching or is pending. Yeah, I like this because now we move that. You don't have to, it's not like this is always the API. But how it responds to fetch, it being implicit or explicit, is defined on the async value. And then it could, of course, default to true if we think that's the best way to do it. I like this. This cleans up a lot. And then you have this like the traditional normal state machine approach, which is pending, error, and the data, right? And then you have the ability to manually fetch again. And if it happens lazily or not is defined by this thing. And then you have promise, which you can choose to return instead, right? So you can do profile.promise and bippity boo, it's Suspense. And it follows the same rule. What should happen when it refetches? I love that. Please tell me you love it too, Adam. You can argue about like the option here, like exactly how you define it. You can create lazy. You could rather do lazy async. I think that will be better. It makes it even more explicit. Okay, but this is cool. And what also makes this cool is that we can just tell it not to implement transition. Just the suspense part. Oh, I really want to do this now. Yeah, the question is like what we're going to call this thing. Yeah, I guess it should be async. Well, yeah, lazy is a little bit because it might seem like this is lazy, like it doesn't call it right away. Yeah, this is interesting. Yeah, maybe it needs to be an option. So because you can configure things like lazy would actually be that's true by the sorry, that's false by default, which means will it execute immediately, or do you have to call fetch first? Well, that's weird because if you're consuming a state, no, I guess that's fine. Like there can be scenarios for that, and then it would be yeah. So there are different things to configure for sure. Yeah, you can have debounds. Async is so like when you think about async as a value, it's seemingly simple. Like it's just a promise, right? You just have to wait it. But async is incredibly complex. Yeah, anyways, so lazy is false, and then it's you could have suspend, which is, well, that's a bad name because it would initially suspend. What does that mean? Like initially it suspends, but then it doesn't suspend. Yeah, at least it's a single threaded async. But what does it mean to suspend initially and then it doesn't suspend anymore? It's related to suspend, so it should have, well, you could call it lazy suspend. Anyways, so that's by default true. It doesn't matter. You can find better names for this, but yeah, it's interesting. I wonder what options does TanStack query have for the query? Yeah, it has a lot of stuff, right? And you can argue like some of these things shouldn't be there on like a lower level async thing, like refetch on window focus. That's something you just set up, right? Just a subscription, and you call the fetch method. Yeah, initial data, maybe. Retries, refetch interval. Yeah, that's also something you can just set up. But the cache time, that's an interesting one. Well, that's also something you could just set up. Stale time enabled. Yeah, this one's also interesting. Like, yeah, so one thing that's interesting about Solid is that one thing is the fetch, but you could also give it well, yeah, no, that doesn't matter. Yeah, you know what's also cool about this is that you could create, how would this work? Yeah. Yeah, sorry. I was just reflecting on like the global cache. I think that would be interesting. But how is that different from, why does this need a global cache? Well, yeah, because you have to refetch the initial value. But with state, you just define the initial value. Yeah. Yeah, so that's also something to consider, like cache key. So you can do like ID, whatever, something like profile, stuff like that. Okay, let's do it. So let's look at the actual, well, first of all, I wanted to transition. Let's just remove this. There's a lot to, okay, I'm gonna ask. Oh, by the way. Actually, I changed my mind on the transition. Please remove the transition spec from the plan. And then we can read the suspense thing, and then we can ask it to implement it. I love these terms. Nucleating. Like there's so many just random words like boinking and clothing. Well, another thing we can talk about in the meantime is where do we put this stuff? Here we are. So another thing is like mutation. So this is, I feel this is related because create async is querying. Promise we need to have a property on it to know when to suspend. Oh, yeah, like that. Yeah, technically, how would it know? I wonder if it could just be a internal global thing. So basically, so technically, the way I think about this is if it's lazy, so it shouldn't like triggers the suspend fallback. When this evaluates, it's gonna trigger the this thing, right? So we can globally just set prevent suspension. I think. Oh, that's interesting. Yeah. So would that mean, what if there's anything else synchronous? Yeah, we can do that. So basically what happens is you create a flag internally when it resolves this value and triggers the observer down here that prevents suspend. And then when this hits, so it's kind of like yeah, so it already does this in the plan. Like this reactive child sees that it's a promise that's returned. It walks up the component tree, finds the suspense, and then notifies about it. So basically what would happen if we have lazy suspend is it would have like a global flag of like suspend ignore or something. It would trigger the value, the promise would resolve, it would walk up suspense, find suspense parent, but that says no, it's ignored. Or maybe even at that point, it wouldn't walk up to find the suspense boundary even. So the suspense component is just, I'm here, I'm ready to be notified to trigger. But if the async value is configured not to do that, go up and notify the suspense. I think that makes most sense. But what I'm reflecting on is, when do you turn that off? So it might be better, as you say, to put it on the promise itself. Yeah. That the promise has a flag that tells it if it should notify the suspense component or not. Yeah. Yeah, that seems safer. Okay, did it fix it? Done. Thank you. Okay. Is it the update? Yes. This document outlines the design and implementation plan for adding async reactive child support with suspense boundaries to the UI library. Strict boundaries: async reactive child must have a suspense ancestor or throws error. Always suspense. Suspense shows pending state whenever pending children size is over 0, regardless of initial versus re-render. And this is fine now, like, because now it's not the suspense component that controls this. It's what we just talked about. It's if the async value is going to notify the suspense boundary or not. Store result values without rendering. Yeah, this is also interesting. I don't think it needs to store any values. Yeah, we don't actually have to do that, because the value is already resolved in the reactive child. Yeah, okay, let's change that. So in the plan, we're mentioning that the suspense component or the suspense boundary should keep a reference to the resolved value. I don't think that's necessary, because the reactive child that notifies the suspense boundary already has the value. So when the suspense boundary resolves its pending children, the children already has the value it wants to display. I'm getting a bit sick and tired of this. I hope they change Claude to be more like GPT. Maybe I should just do that. Like, you can configure Claude at a system level, how it's gonna like talk. Yeah, I would love to do that. Give it a different. That would be a cool thing. Like if Anthropic shipped like personalities for Claude, because that's what OpenAI has like really nailed down, is like how not that it's so like always tells you you're right, but it has like this tone, which is really cool. What I do like about Claude, though, I I accidentally asked it to like implement something, and I told it I was excited about it. And what I noticed is that it got stuck. And then it kept like went through a couple of iterations to resolve it, but it was suddenly using terms like it was excited. So it was like, aha, I found it, like shouting out, like super excited, and I just want to get this done. That was really, really cool. So I wonder how you can like tune that behavior. Yeah, maybe just have a very excited Claude. Okay, let's look at the documentation again. Oh. Oh, wait, it's still... did it? This is the updated one, right? Oh, but we're still mentioning deferred value at the top of the plan. I don't think that should be there anymore, should it? Are there other places where we're referencing this deferred behavior of suspense where it keeps the resolved value? It shouldn't be there. Yeah, like you're absolutely right. It's so hard coded. It doesn't have to say that every time. But again, if it doesn't lead with something, it just feels like a colleague who's kind of annoyed with you. Looking at yeah, in the reactive child. Yeah, the result value is needed in the reactive child, but it looks like it was referring to the suspense component having a result value, which it doesn't need. Yeah, okay. Oh, yeah. It was just didn't clarify. Anyways, each reactive child stores its result value locally and waits to render until suspense signals all children are ready. That makes a lot of sense. Bubble up notification, reactive child notifies suspense via parent chain traversal. All DOM updates happen at once when all async children resolve. API design. This is also something I haven't understood. Why suspense doesn't have an error? So why have fallback? Why don't have pending and error? Because it's managing async values, and there's a chance it's going to error, and you want to manage that with the suspense boundary. I'm not saying that you shouldn't have error boundary components, but if you have a suspense boundary, you definitely want to handle when it errors as well, which I find very interesting. So it has error. Yeah, pending error to show when any async child rejects children. Yeah, states pending error success. Example component tree. Nested component. Yeah, so here we have something async. Yes, this is a complex example. You have async with an async nested component, and then you have a nested component with an async. So you have basically three asyncs happening. First, this one, and nested in this one, which means that the suspense should wait for all these three to resolve before before it does something, or before it like doesn't have any pending children. It's going to show the UI. And what's really important here is that, just like Ryan showed in the solid demo, is that it won't wait for how did this work in React? Like in React, you would have to, like you would use this promise and it would immediately throw, right? To the suspense boundary, I think. Well, here you can just mix and match all the async values and it's not going to block. Yeah, so this is maybe the thing that is confusing. So there is no thing called like an async component. What you have is an async. I'm calling it reactive child. So this is just a child and it's async. It's not a component. So the reason I call it child is because whatever you put inside here is children, right? So, hi, these are all the children. This is a child, this is a child, and it happens to be async. Yeah, exactly. But there is, I think you're making a good like mental model change point that you kind of have to overcome. Anyway, so it resolves all those three, but then it suddenly resolves this one, which also has an async. And what's going to happen here is that it's going to throw to suspense again. So this is like a bad experience example, because here it would kind of resolve, maybe we'll resolve this. It doesn't matter like which one resolves first. When all of them resolves, it just throws to suspense again. So what you would typically do here, like you probably have a different suspense for this one, right? Because it's like nested in a component that it's nested in something that's asynchronously resolved. Well, wait. Oh, this is interesting. Wait, no. You know what I would want this to do? I would want this to be pushed to the. Yeah, this is interesting because I wasn't in a good place. I think I was too much information, but it's starting to distill quite clearly now. But what should happen here is that this should return a promise because it has async children. So it's almost like, what if a component somehow could return. Oh, this is so interesting. So what if a component becomes, oh, that would be amazing, because what would happen in this case is that it wouldn't resolve these three first, and then it would start fetching this one, but it would fetch all of them. Also the async nested component, because it is calling this. Wait, or will that actually work? No, wait, I guess. Yeah, what's actually gonna happen here? I need to ask it. Let's see. Okay, sorry. Let's see what it writes here. But it's a really cool thing, right? So if you have, but why even have async here? Yeah, it's such a bad example. Like I think the idea here is that you would have like something like this. Like you would have something like this. Yeah, I think that's what I thought initially. Like I would do something like that, but this is such a weird example. Like the example should be this. Yeah, but that's the same. Okay, sorry. So the point, God damn it. So the point is, what am I trying to do here? Why do I have this as an example? Yeah, I think, Yeah, because this isn't async. Like this is what it is, right? It's weird. Yeah, sorry, the example doesn't make any sense at all. I'm trying to create a scenario where, okay, I have two thoughts at the same time here. One thing is testing that if I were to do something async here, actually return a promise, it should still start fetching this thing. That's the whole point of this example. Like, oh, wait, I know what I was trying to do now. Sorry, I was trying to do something like fetch something, then like something like this. Yeah, sorry, that was the example. So yeah, let me change the example here so it's more clear. So await something async return. This is what it was supposed to be. So because I wanted to have an example of like what happens if you do something async that resolves to something doing async, which this is showing. So basically this would resolve in parallel with this thing, right? So we'll wait for this something async. Let's just put something async in here. Something async, sub-nested, something async. So it's not so pseudocode. Cool. So it will be waiting for this, then display it. It will be waiting for this again, but it's going to return a new component that also is going to have something async, and then it waits for this one. So this one, and this one are running in parallel. And then it's going to resolve this promise, which is going to display a component. But that component has a new async. So that's going to, in this case, just going to fire the suspense boundary again. Which means, but the point is that this async won't start until these three have resolved themselves. Well, is that true? Because immediately when this resolves, so let's imagine this takes, okay, something async 3000 and then 2000 here. Wait, what did I click? Oh, so in total, it's going to take 3 seconds, right? Because this is running in parallel. But after 1 second, it's going to return async nested component, and it's going to evaluate that component, right? Which is going to trigger this thing, which is going to add to the suspense, right? So it just takes longer to resolve the whole thing. So there is a waterfall, but it's not blocking waterfall, right? Which is really cool. But then we could change the numbers. So if this is 3000, this is 2000, sorry, 1000, then these would all resolve in parallel. And, and after 3 seconds, it would return this async nested component, but that would notify the suspense boundary again. So it would behave the same. My point is that you have this one fallback suspense boundary, and it doesn't matter how you compose your asyncness down the tree. It's going to keep that fallback running until everything's ready. Even if you're asynchronously resolving new UI, it's still going to be in its pending state. That's what I want. Okay, cool. Okay, so I'm just gonna so I just updated the complex async example in the plan, and the way I expect that to work is that it's gonna resolve the immediate async functions or async reactive childs in parallel. But when the middle reactive child returns a new component which has its own reactive child, I want to make sure that it will notify the suspense boundary, and the suspense boundary will still be pending, right? So it's resolving the 3 first promises, but one of the promises is a new component that will notify again about the reactive child. So it kind of keeps the suspense boundary going. Does that make sense? Could you adjust the rest of the plan after that example to reflect this? Oh, that's what you meant. Yeah, it's incredibly complex. Like the scenarios are incredibly complex, but if you can make that natural, and it does make sense, right? Because the whole promise that's being returned here is like we're doing some data fetching, we're returning a component we want to display, but that component is kind of like a promise, right? In the sense that it has reactive children that resolves asynchronously. But what we could do if we didn't want that behavior, we would just create a new suspense boundary around this, right? If we wanted this to resolve later as this is being mounted. Yeah, it will be a... Are you drinking, Adam? Or are you noticing the same as me? Like, I gotten worse at typing. I'm out of sync with my brain. I'm not as efficient anymore at like just writing correctly what I'm thinking. I can even miss words. I'm not just typing words. I'm missing whole words in the sentence I'm trying to write. Suspense tries to, but immediately discover a new async child. Exactly. This keeps suspense pending without ever showing count. No flash of loading. Yes. Nice. Okay, let's see what it wrote here. Okay, so we have a suspense boundary. We have a nested component. Oh yeah, this is just a initial test. So first async returns blah blah blah. Second async reactive child returns promise 2. Subnested runs. Third async reactive child created returns promise 3. Suspense data is pending children 3. UI shows loading. Yes. All 3 async reactive children run in parallel immediately. Phase 2, promise 1 resolves first after 1 millisecond. reactive child restores the result value, notifies suspense, resolve pending child, child 1, suspense says pending children 2, blah, blah, blah. Fine. Phase 3, promise 3 resolves, 2 seconds. Reactive child stores result value, same thing, blah, blah, blah. Second promise resolves, still waiting for the last one. So it resolves. Reactive child stores result value, which is the async nested component, notifies suspense. Yeah, all clear, trigger commit phase. Yeah. Suspend. Okay, let's go with this. Yeah, yeah. Okay, yeah, I know that phenomenon. I know that phenomenon. Yeah, it's funny. Suspense. Okay, passes. Suspense re-renders and returns props.children. This triggers all reactive children's auto runs to re-execute. Oh, but this is wrong. It shouldn't re-execute anything. Oh, interesting. Okay, okay. I guess that's fine. Evaluates async component, function runs, creates new async reactive child, returns promise 4 register with suspense, suspense stays pending. Oh, okay. So the way it actually resolves. Yeah, I don't understand why it needs to rerun. Auto run is the actual function, the observation function. I don't understand why it needs to rerun. Like it just needs to. Yeah, what does it actually need to do? The point is that it should like. Yeah, the way I think about this is that. Sorry, I'm actually out of time. I'm going to the dentist and stuff, so I have to get some food. But the way I think about this is that when these components evaluate, they are actually creating the DOM elements. But then it's in memory, right? Because the suspense boundary isn't added to the DOM. So it's building up the children of the suspense, basically, as it's evaluating these components. So when an async reactive child resolves, it just runs the DOM operations. And there's a whole different discussion on if this is a good idea, but that's how it works now. So in this context, I don't want to run the auto run again. Because when the auto run resolves, it will append the children. Or I have to ask it about this. Okay, let's just ask it. So in the current implementation, when I'm using a reactive child, it immediately, when that function runs, it immediately applies the relevant DOM operations, right? To put that value into the tree of the component. Yeah, exactly. So I would expect that to just happen. So there's no reason to rerun the auto run. This will just happen, and there's no reason to notify anything. Okay, for Suspense, it needs to change when the result is a promise. Instead of throwing an error or trying to render a promise, we need to detect that out instance of... But don't render anything yet. Wait for resolution. Oh, okay. Yeah, but I think that should just be... Okay, so the thing I'm reflecting on is that currently the reactive child is handling the promise and then notifies the suspense boundary. But then the suspense boundary asks the child to run the auto run again. But is that really necessary? Because isn't the auto run itself waiting on the promise, then updating the DOM when it has resolved? So the only thing the suspense boundary really needs to do is to wait for all the async children to have resolved, and then immediately just apply its children, because they have already been updated by the reactive child. Does that make sense? Look at that. Wow, you're a smart dude. Yeah, much simpler and more elegant. But this is what I like about AI, is being able to just reflect conceptually how the code should flow. Oh, I need to... The autorun doesn't rerun when a promise resolves. The autorun only... Oh, sorry, I didn't mean that the autorun will rerun when the promise resolves, but when the promise resolves, it will append the DOM change, right? Yeah, exactly. Oh, it did figure that out. Then, so autorun returns promise, notify suspense, clear region, promise result, directly update the DOM, don't wait for autorun, notify suspense, I'm done. When all results, suspense just switches from pending to children, which are already rendered. Yes, exactly. That's what I'm thinking. And again, this doesn't affect the actual DOM because this is happening in memory, right? So it's not applying anything to the DOM. Yeah, suspense only controls visibility isn't really... Visibility sounds like display none, but it's not display none. It's... And just to be clear, the suspense doesn't like do display none or change the opacity. It doesn't really affect the visibility. It's more, is the children of the suspense actually mounted or not? Could you use that terminology instead? Amazing. So this is why we still have a component tree in memory, is because the DOM might not be mounted, right? Because of suspense or whatever. So the component tree is what holds all the logic, all the state, all your like whatever logic you have. And then, yeah, I'm excited about this implementation. But yeah, I really have to, let's see. So I'm going to the, yeah, I have to, Okay, let's see now what it says. It would be nice to kind of finish the plan, and then I can just ask Claude to implement it, and then we can test it tomorrow. But let's see. Behavior. When async... yeah, this is probably fine. Oh, maybe we should read this. Yeah, here we are. Okay, phase 4, promise to resolves. Creates new function runs, creates new async reactive child, returns promise for registers with suspense, pending. Oh, sorry, this is the, I read this wrong. So returns async nested component. And it resolves reactive child renders async nested component to its DOM region. Async nested component function runs, creates new async reactive child, returns promise for registers with suspense. Suspense stays pending, exactly. Key, when child 2 renders async nested component to its region, it immediately creates a new async child that registers with suspense before child 2 finishes notifying suspense. Exactly. The pending count goes 1, 0, 1. Exactly. Either way, suspense never switches what's mounted because it's never truly at 0 pending children. Amazing. This makes a lot of sense to me. Promise 4 resolves. From async nested components, async child resolves, reactive child renders resolve, blah, blah, blah. Now 0, suspense state 0, and now all async work is truly complete. Suspense and mounts pending and mounts children. All the actual content was already rendered to reactive child region. Suspense just switches what's mounted at the suspense boundary level. This is beautiful. This makes sense. Probably something I haven't thought of yet. What happens if the suspense boundary is unmounted? Well, I guess nothing really happens. It's something to evaluate, though. Okay, I'm just gonna ask it then. Okay, all this makes a shit ton of sense to me now. But one thing, what would happen if the suspense boundary is unmounted with pending reactive childs? Does it properly clean that up? Great question. Let's trace through what happens with the current design. Suspense and mounts while children. What happens? Reactive children child's outrun is running. Promise is pending, still waiting for. Suspense unmounts. Reactive child component.dispose. Suspense children unmount. Reactive child.dispose is called, but the promise callback is still registered. We need to clean up pending promises when reactive child. I can see already has a disposal. Is to store a flag and check it in the... Oh yeah, exactly. Exactly. So when a reactive child resolves its promise, it should check if it has been disposed or not. So it doesn't like notify or start appending to the DOM or anything. Nice. That makes a lot of sense. Okay, I think I'm super pumped about this. So I'm gonna get some food, get some work done, and then I'm gonna go to the dentist, get some more work done, and I'm gonna let Claude work on this in the background. And then we'll do another stream tomorrow morning, testing out this, and then we can build a create async, because that's a separate implementation, right? This is just the basics of promise handling. Okay, cool. I guess it's metric. Yeah. Yep. Thanks for the being such a coach and what's it called? Yeah, coach, I guess is the term. Adam. We'll speak tomorrow. Have a good night, and then I'll continue my day. Bye for now.